a leading expert in procurement strategies and government contracting, with years of experiences helping businesses secure government contracts. Eric will provide key insights on procurement frameworks, tendering best practices, and compliance essentials to help businesses unlock new opportunities in Queensland. Please welcome Eric.
Hello, nice to be here. We pop over to the next slide. What I want to do in this session is share with you the experience I've had across many industries in procurement and basically frame the discussion around what procurement is, because it's not just about securing contracts. It's about having a strategic position. It's about your risk management and your scalability. And most procurement fails when it does fail due to unrealistic expectations, poor risk management, and insufficient due diligence. So when we get into this, which we'll be doing very shortly, the objective is to give you the insights so you can plan for your procurement and create better outcomes. So identifying your sources, you've got government and non-government sources for when you're looking at your procurement. And when you're looking at what you want to do, you have to understand what they need out of you. So your corporate supply chains and your government supply chains have different requirements. And then there's industry specific requirements that you'd have to consider as well. We will actually, I think I might be one ahead here because we're going to be talking about, there we go. Sorry. So government versus corporate. So when you're planning, you have to plan for what the requirements are. And there's a lot of governance behind both, but the governance, the emphasis is different with government contracts and corporate contracts. And then you've got industry specific. So if you're aiming at supplying into a particular industry, say you're supplying your fashion, say uniforms or something, into industry that might be scientific or industry that might be mining or something like that, then there'll be other requirements around your governance and your quality control. Can we have the next slide, please? So when you're coming, and we're in the decision-making process, whether or not you want to do this, you have to then look at, well, can I do this? What is our capacity? And differentiate yourself from your competitors. So what sets you apart? And when you look at your capacity, can you do this alone, or should you collaborate, or should you subcontract? And we'll talk about that very shortly. But getting into government contracting and government procurement and commercial procurement, going back to what I said right at the beginning, it is about what is your strategy? What is your risk assessment? What is your risk appetite? And what is your risk tolerance with that? With registration and accreditation, that comes into, there's a lot of systems out there that you can become a pre-qualified supplier. And in those processes, you're not necessarily going for a tender for supplying a thing. You're going for a tender to become a preferred supplier. So you're putting out your pricing, you're putting out your quality assurance, you're putting out all the details to be approved. So then when contracts are under a certain amount, that particular government department or local government, they can come directly to you and say, can I get a request for quotes? And so they're getting on a preferred supplier list, and marketing into that sector can be quite effective. Next slide, please. So your risk factors. Again, we're talking about going for anything. What are your financial risks? Your financial risks are around over-promising and under-delivering, but underpricing when you're putting together your tender, your procurement, you need to understand it's not always about price. So you don't have to be the cheapest. It's about value for money. And value for money is based on the requirements of the tender. So every tender will actually have how they're measuring things. The operational risks come down to your resource allocation, your supply chain. Do you have contingency? So if you've got a particular supplier for something and you've got a bigger contract than they could normally supply, do you have a backup? We had a cyclone recently. So if you have a supplier that was affected by that cyclone, do you have a backup and contingency there? So those operational risks are things that you have to consider before you actually make the put the tender together. Your legal and compliance risks. This is where my experience is. This is where most businesses fall down. Not understanding the contract they're going to be bound to when they go into the supply agreement, and understanding the KPIs and what milestones. That is where most people fall down in their contractual arrangements, because they don't understand what they need to do where. They haven't done the proper due diligence. And so before you bid, understand the contract, because every tender that you go for will have a copy of the contract. Right? They'll have a standard contract. You read through that. You get to understand exactly what the requirements on you are. And this comes back to underpricing. Sometimes, and actually a lot of the time, I can talk to manufacturing contracts where the manufacturers haven't done the proper amount of due diligence on the compliance requirements, and therefore haven't factored that into the pricing requirements. And so your overheads for managing the contract aren't taken into account. And then, of course, the last thing you've got to be concerned about is your reputational risk. And that comes back to, have you failed to deliver? Does your due diligence in your suppliers not satisfy the requirements of compliance? And your supply chain is something that you have to have due diligence in, because, and we'll get to it with further on with the compliance, but there's a lot of compliance around environment, sustainability and governance. There's a lot of compliance around your policies and procedures and things like that. So you need to be considering this before you even start. Next slide, please. So this slide pretty much speaks to itself. You understand your risks. You've evaluated your risk. You now know your limits. You've now looked at contract. So you know what your capacity is. You know what the contract is requiring of you. And now you've looked at, well, what contingencies do we have in place? This is the bit where you decide, do we do it or not? Okay? Not every tender is probably a good choice for you. But if you go through and you do this due diligence in the background, you'll know which ones are, and you'll know whether or not you can do it yourself, whether you should collaborate. But it's important to understand, once you know your limits, once you've reviewed the contract, and once you've worked out whether or not you can have contingencies in place, then you can make the decision, yes, we're going to go ahead. Next slide, please. Okay, I think that's basically the same slide twice. So I think I've made a mistake there for the presenters. I apologise. But also make sure you've got your insurance and liability coverage. Next slide, please. We're going to get into collaboration now. And so the big thing with collaboration is you can improve your capacity. You can improve how much you can do by collaborating. There are issues and there are things that come together with having a collaboration and joint ventures in going for these contracts, but they are viable strategies. The things that you have to consider really come back to, again, the same sort of risk management, but now you're thinking it as a joint venture. It could be, are you setting up a new company as a joint venture, or are you doing the collaboration? So who's going to take the lead? Why they've got the lead? What is the credibility? And what is everyone's part? And how do you minimize the liability that each person's taking on in order to make sure that you've got a successful outcome? Because remember, the people reading your presentation, the people that you're presenting to and saying, use us, we're credible, they're looking for credibility. That is the main thing in resourcing, in putting together tenders and putting together procurement agreements is, are you a credible, reliable source for what you are providing? The option, if you decide that the capacity is too great, so there's a tender out there, you'd love it, but you know that you're not at that stage yet, is subcontracting. And we help a lot of clients with this, especially in the trades industry, where you might have, and I'll use the trades industry as an example because I've got a recent example here. There was an electrician who the contract themselves was too big for them. So they waited to see who won the contract and then approached that company and said, if you ever need a subcontractor to help you with your capacity, to help you actually achieve what the requirements, then give us a call. And so they've actually picked up the business as a subcontractor to the overall contract. And that is where, for smaller companies, it might be the way to get in. Subcontracting to a larger company that has the capacity, and you're getting in by becoming one of their contingencies. So going back to what I said before, you've got to have your contingencies. If you're a smaller business and you want to get in, you might want to actually become someone else's contingency and talk to them about being part of their network. And of course, if you want to be successful in anything, not just procurement, you've got to leverage networks. So you've got to understand what your industry alliances can be. You've got to understand that some of your competitors could actually be your partners, and you've got to leverage those networks. And the best advice I can give with regards to considering your competitors, when you consider your competitors, when you're doing a SWOT analysis and you do that, they're your competitors and you're making, how do you stand out? But further consideration when you're doing this should be, could we work together? Is there an opportunity for this competitor to be a collaborator? And that is how you start to grow. Next slide, please. So the right partners, and this is what I was just getting to there. You need complementary skills. What do they do that you don't quite? Are you doing the same thing and you're just increasing capacity? So we're using a simple thing. We're producing T-shirts as a uniform, and I can only produce 1,000. They need 10,000. I need other people to produce the rest. Or is it you're getting a collaborative partner, and that partner is, I can produce all the shirts they want, but I actually need to make sure that I've got the right partner for delivery, because the delivery is one of the main criteria and one of the main measurements that we're going to be with. So do we have the combined skills to deliver everything within the contract? And then naturally make sure that you've got aligned values. You want to be dealing with organisations that share your values and reflect your values, because your values are going to be part of the presentation you put forward, and it's part of the decision-making process to use you. The why you is part of your values. So your supply chain and your partners must align with your values. When you're structuring your agreements in these things, you need to make sure that everything is nice and clear. You have to have proper, clear roles, clear responsibilities, and very crystal clear risk allocation. You need to make sure that risk is mitigated and everyone understands what their version of risk is and what their requirements are to make sure that it's mitigated. And then maintaining compliance. This comes back to, we're going to getting into all your policies and procedures soon, but this comes back to everyone in your supply chain must be compliant to the quality manual, your purchasing policies, your ESG reporting. All those things have to come into play, and that compliance is across the board. So the compliance that you sign up to in that contract is compliance that you have to make sure is throughout all your suppliers, all your partners, and the complete supply chain. It's very important. And again, this is going back to the risk that I was talking about earlier. It's part of the contractual arrangement will be throughout your entire supply chain. And compliance isn't compliance just for you, it's compliance for the entire contract, which means all your suppliers. If there's a chance they could affect your compliance, if there's a chance that, for argument's sake, you've done a sworn declaration with regards to modern slavery, then if you've got suppliers, you need to check that they agree with your modern slavery statement or they have their own. Next slide, please. Okay, now we get into the nitty-gritty of what is actually required. So when you're putting together your proposal, the requirements within the document, the tender document, there will be a whole requirement with regards to insurance. So your public liability, your professional indemnity, workers' compensation, and so forth. Then you'll have to have, as a bare minimum, workplace health and safety policies, cybersecurity protocols, ESG commitments, industrial relations, risk management, quality assurance, and with the changes in industrial relations, with the changes to the Fair Work Act, now you also will have to have other compliance things that go with that. And there's far too many for me to go into detail here. That would be a whole presentation within itself. The next thing they're looking at is your financial and operational viability. So for a lot of tenders, you'll either have to provide a director's guarantee saying that you will be able to satisfy the contract, or they may want to see your financials. There may be a declaration from your accountant saying that they believe that you can pay your bills on time, and so on. And then lastly, I mentioned modern slavery before, you've got ethical and sustainability practices. This is where most contracts nowadays will require that you'll either have a modern slavery statement, or if your organisation isn't legally required to have one, that you agree in principle to a modern slavery statement. The same goes with, you may not be big enough, or you may not have ISO compliance with, say, 9001, 14001, so for quality assurance and environment. But you may need to say that you have policies and procedures that actually comply with the ISO standards, even though you haven't registered to become ISO compliant. So you might not have the registered ISO compliance, but you can say that you're aligned to ISO standards. And for a lot of tenders, it's coming out more and more that that's what you have to have. Then environmental impact statements. So in the fashion industry, this will be a bit less cumbersome than what it sounds, but you would need to show what sort of impact your materials, your dyes, all that have on the environment. Do you have sustainable suppliers and so forth? Next slide, please. So we're coming up to the end of me, and the key takeaways, what I want you to take away from my chat today is, before you get into procurement, actually have a strategic plan. So why are we doing it? What are we doing it? What is our risk assessment? What is the capacity we can go to that's us? And what capacity after that do we look at having collaborative partners? Then, obviously, who are the collaborative partners that we can have? Do we start having chats with them now? Should we be looking at and what is the strategy around becoming a subcontractor to people who already have these contracts? So do I go out and find contracts that already exist, already been awarded, and start talking to current suppliers and start supplying them? Now, I will stress that that is a great idea, purely because when you put in your experience, which you're going to have to put in the documentation, what experience do you have? Again, comes down to credibility. If you can show that you've been supplying to one of their subcontractors or an approved supplier, then there's your credibility, because you've obviously supplied to the standard that is required, and that goes a long way to getting you through the door. Due diligence isn't just about your requirement, and it's not just a requirement, it's competitive advantage. I have to say, a lot of businesses don't do the due diligence they should when it comes to tendering, and a lot of the time when we get called in, we're there to try and fix things that would never have occurred if they did all the things I've advised here, all the due diligence I've mentioned here. If it's done right at the beginning, then when a problem arises, you've already considered what strategies you're going to have and what mitigation process you'll have to avoid or to repair any damage. Capacity building through partnerships just unlocks so much, and looking at your competitors as potential partners is actually a great way to grow. And I guess my final thought here is winning the contract is one thing, but delivering it successfully is what builds credibility. And delivering it successfully is where your stress will start. I know putting together a tender sounds stressful and so on, and it can be, and it's a quite a in-depth and stressful process. And you've got to have all the policies behind you. You've got to have all your procedures down pat. You've got to have your governance spot on. You've got to prove the credibility. But delivering on that promise, that is where the hardest part. So I can't stress enough, know your responsibilities before you even go so far as to working out what the first dollar value might be. So that's me. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and good luck.